Hello, my name is Allison, and I'm here to tell you about what it's like to live a day in the life as a graduate student. I was one for about 8 years. I did both a master's degree and a PhD, focusing on cardiovascular physiology with a little bit of tissue engineering near the tail end of my PhD. And Currently I'm doing a postdoctoral fellowship in digital health communications, which is completely different from what I was doing during my graduate studies. But you may be wondering, what is a graduate student? And that is a very good question, because lots of people don't realize when they go into undergraduate degrees is that you can continue going to university many, many years as a student after you have your undergraduate degree in an area that focuses on research. So when you are pursuing an undergraduate degree, it's very good to keep an open mind about what interests you and what excites you. If pursuing a career in research or just figuring out a question that you have or pursuing something that you're passionate about is of interest to you. Because as a graduate student, you basically, if you're in a research trajectory, because there are types of graduate students that do only course-based focused graduate degrees. I was not one of them. I had a couple research projects that I completed during my degrees. But you are able to actually pursue a research question and discover something that no one else in the world has yet discovered. As a graduate student, in the STEM field, for the most part, you get to answer research questions and work with a supervisor and collaborators to help you answer those research questions. So I know that that might seem a little far off, because in order to get a graduate degree, you have to start with an undergraduate degree and complete that. So something that's very good piece of advice for those that are pursuing undergraduate school. So that's just your bachelor's. Keep you an open mind about something that interests you, because if you have a professor that is talking or researching about something that you're really intrigued by or you're curious to learn more about, it's very, very common for that to be your foot in the door into research as early as the undergraduates. So if there's someone on campus when you're starting your degree that you want to know more about what they actually do when they're not teaching, so their research program, for example, then this is an opportunity for you to actually go talk to them and maybe volunteer some time in the lab, figure out if doing research is something that interests you. And starting in an undergraduate, as an undergraduate, is a very good way to start. It comes to doing wet lab research. As a graduate student, you're essentially working on a bench in a lab coat with your PPE, and you are designing experiments, sometimes with human tissue, sometimes with animal tissue, depending on your research project. And you are pretty much trying to answer a research question based on an experiment that you have designed or that you have worked with your supervisor to design. I was really interested in how different environments of the body can actually change cells' physiology. So a stem cell is influenced by the environment around it to become a specific type of cell. So I was really interested from a disease perspective. So my experiments kind of focused all around understanding that aspect of stem cell differentiation. And there are also field graduate study opportunities. So that's where you go out in the field to collect some. So I did my degree at the University of Alberta, and Alberta has a ton of dinosaur fossils. So graduate students that are interested in paleontology, they would go out in the summer and they would go and they would collect fossils, go to dig sites, and then coming back in the winter, because you are not digging outside in -40, to then analyze the samples that you have. So those are two different kinds of STEM-focused graduate students day-to-days. Is you have the lab environment, and then you have the field environment. You may be teaching, you may not be teaching. So within most faculty of medicine research labs, there isn't really an opportunity to TA, so that's essentially teaching labs, whereas in other departments that have a large undergraduate body of students, you will be teaching, and being a teaching assistant and teaching a lab is going to be part of your requirements in order to complete your degree for the most part. One of the things that was very important for me as a graduate student was having access to a bunch of other opportunities that were available, because the university has a lot of different resources and a lot of opportunities for you to be able to develop your soft skills. So not just your research program and being good at pipetting and writing and presenting, because these are all stuff that's very important as a graduate student. You have to be able to write your research proposals, to be able to apply for awards and submit to competitions. You also are going to be presenting your work, so being able to present and talk about your research in a way that's understandable to other researchers within your field and those not in your field is very important. So you learn all those skills during a traditional STEM graduate student research-based essentially. So what's important is developing soft skills. So these are the skills that kind of would set you apart from other graduates. Typical day as a graduate student, especially during my PhD, was I'd wake up about 5-6 o'clock in the morning. This isn't always the case, but I was consenting patients that were going into open heart surgery that morning, and I needed to be able to access them before they went under, right? So I can't consent a patient that's unconscious. So what I would do is I would get to the lab, and get the documentation that was required in order to consent the patients, and then I would wait and prepare what I needed in order to be able to appropriately collect tissue. I get a phone call between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning and go to the OR, so I got to actually but I got to go to the OR ward where the patient was having their surgery in order to pick up tissue from the surgeons that were working, and then I would take it back to the lab and I'd prep it, and then I would go and consent my next group of patients for the afternoon, and throughout this time I would go and maintain the cells, because I was collecting cells, so I needed to keep them alive. If it was in the summer, I would have summer students, so I would be training summer students as well, and that's something that you get to do as a graduate student quite often. Is there'll be summer students coming into the lab, and you'll kind of be a mentor to them and teach them how to help you out with your project. So as an undergraduate, you might actually be one of these summer students that comes into the lab and working with a graduate student in order to help them out on their project. So that's a very good opportunity to kind of get your foot in the door, is being a summer student in a lab, especially something that you're interested in. And it's very easy to just send an email to a professor and be like, hey, I'm interested in volunteering or working in your lab in the summer, and seeing what they say. Tissue acquisition, because I needed tissue in order to be able to do my experiments. Once I had enough tissue, I would then focus my days on performing my experiments, and waiting for cells to grow sometimes takes a little bit of time, so and it was always dependent on how many patients I could consent, how many patients were doing the surgery that permitted me to acquire waste tissue from them. I really enjoyed my time as a graduate student, and one of the most important things about having a good time as a graduate student is making sure that you're in an environment, a lab environment, that works well for you. So it was really nice to be in an environment where everyone else was doing something very, very different. They were doing ex vivo organ perfusion, which is essentially hanging organs up and seeing how long they'll last, and figuring out the best way in order to do that in order to increase the donor pool. But I was working with tissue engineering and like a little cell culture dishes with human tissue, so I was not doing these big macro physiology experiments per se. But I liked being in that environment because I was learning a lot from my lab mates and what entailed that research. It's very important, if you are interested in pursuing graduate studies, that you find something that you're excited by, something that you're curious about, and that you're in an environment and you're working with people that you enjoy spending time with, because you will be spending a lot of time in the lab or out in the field pursuing your research question. And to be working with someone that genuinely cares about how successful you are in the field, because that's very important. You want to even though a supervisor might be very busy, they might have a lot on their plate, it's very important to find someone that's willing to take the time to help grow you as a scientist or as a graduate student, because essentially as a graduate student, when you're doing the experiments, you're being a scientist, which is pretty exciting. And I know that this is way down the road. It seems like a long ways away, but the best way to get started on figuring out if you're interested in pursuing a research career is to figure that out at the undergraduate stage when you're going into university and finding out what excites you. Is there any opportunities for you to volunteer in a lab, for you to kind of work on your own little project, and getting your foot in the door early so that you have more opportunities to explore and expand your horizons, and then possibly pursue a research graduate degree and being a graduate student either within the same university or being able to travel abroad and in something that interests you. So another thing that I did while pursuing my research project was I am a huge fan of science communication, hence Teen Nerd Night and why I'm here. My research project involved consenting patients, so I had to go up to patients and tell patients about my research project, and that really was a very fun part for me because it challenged me to be able to talk about my research project in an everyday sort of way so that people would be able to understand what I was doing. And I really, really liked that aspect because it made me realize that I really do love telling others about science. It doesn't necessarily have to be my research project. So I pursued other opportunities to talk about really exciting research, and I tend to throw a spin of science fiction inspired medical technology, which is something that I'm really passionate about. So that was something that I did on my off time. I also, as you can see, have a cat. Acquired him during my master's. Traditionally, the trajectory is to go master's student, PhD, and then postdoctoral position, which is something you do after a PhD, then you get a faculty position. But that's not really the case anymore. So now lots of students are getting their graduate degrees and going into industry, going into government, going into nonprofits, or they are starting their own businesses. So there are many different trajectories you can go after you get a graduate degree. Well, I hope that gave you some insight into what it's like in the day-to-day life of a graduate student. No day is really ever the same as another day, but it's a lot of fun and it's very challenging. It helps you grow quite a lot as a person because you are pursuing learning and you're pursuing research, and you get to be in an environment where everyone is constantly wanting to learn more about something that they're passionate about. So it's really, really great to be in that kind of environment. If you're interested in communicating with me, I am available to be a mentor within Teen Nerd Night. So feel free to get in contact with Teen Nerd Night if you would like to speak with me or have any questions, or if you have any ideas, if you would like to see me talk about something else. I do a lot of talking about science, and this has been a lot of fun. So yeah, have an excellent everything. Bye!